Hello everybody and welcome back to another Sunday video. Each week we jump on here, we talk about trade setups for the week ahead, and without further ado, let's jump right into some ideas and things for this week. If this sort of content is helpful to you, then make sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. We do this every week, so you get free trade ideas if you make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications button. So I wanted to start with the US dollar, which of course looks really interesting here after we just saw a pretty good bounce off of this 105.50 level. So we talked about this actually the last few weeks when addressing the dollar, where we saw basically a little bit of a counter trend here to the downside, right? So there was a good 2-week period, 2.5 weeks really, where the dollar looked really incredibly weak. In fact, we saw on the lower time frames, if we scan over to the 1-hour chart for just a little bit, look at this. On the 1-hour chart for a while here, price action looked very bearish, right? Couldn't get above this area here, right around the 107.30 level, and then continued to push down all the way until it came into the daily level of support. And this is why, if you watch my videos, we very often will jump from the higher time frames down into the lower time frames, because this level was super significant. It was a major retest point to test this area here. Now, in my personal opinion, I think, and this is just probabilities wise, that's all we can do as traders, I think there's a good chance that we probably head north and continue to see this overall trend continue, as this was a very healthy and normal pullback. Now, had we broken out to the downside of this, that would probably have been signs of a potential reversal. But in fact, what we saw was the exact opposite. Not only did we get a nice strong off the daily level, if we drop down to the 4-hour chart, you can see we did put in a nice higher low here. So we kind of have an inverted head and shoulders and some strength coming into the US dollar. So with that in mind, now let's go take a look at some individual currency pairs against the dollar, as well as some others. We'll look at gold, things like that, to consider for this week. So there's your dollar analysis. Strength off of the daily chart could lead into some of the individual currency pairs. Now we move over to Euro USD, and let's take a look here and see what's going on. So again, higher time frame, downtrend, right? So looking for sells predominantly, and then if I'm looking at this thing from a 4-hour chart perspective, there's this idea here where we have resistance up north. This is basically for me the only point of pullback interest, and then there's one other trade setup I want to talk about. So let's talk about the two here. The first idea is that we get a bounce here on the euro. If the euro continues to rally up or go sideways, I will be selling this level as I've been trying to sell a few times. So if this level comes into play, I'd be interested in potentially looking for that as a sell side trade. The idea there could be a sell in this zone. Stops of probably around 70 pips, give or take, gives me some good room to breathe on the trade. And then, of course, the target here is all the way back down at the previous lows. And if we mark that as our target zone, what you'll notice is that there's actually a good bit of distance to the downside. Let's show you guys the actual number of pips. So pip distance would be, this trade is around 300 pips. So there's quite a substantial move to the downside that I think is not yet played out in the market on euro dollar, that I think is coming in the future, especially if the dollar continues to stay so strong. And we had really strong jobs numbers on Friday, which was a huge component to that, and definitely willing to continue to look for shorts on the euro dollar, but not just the euro dollar. I have some several euro ideas to the sell side that I'd be interested in potentially picking up or maintaining this week. So there's euro dollar. Let's go look at the score chart summary for a second. I want to show you this. If we take a look at the strong sell section, what we'll see is that we have EURCAD up top, and I'd like to maybe take a look at EURCAD, but then you also have some Euro Aussie in there. So these are two of the sells on the list for our market scanner. You also have the pound dollar coming in as a sell, which I thought was interesting. So perhaps we'll take a look at pound USD in just a moment. But what this is doing is this is taking all of our different components, things like unemployment rate, inflation, interest rate, and valuation, which is a new one, which doesn't really apply to currency pairs, but it does apply to indices. COT and sentiment. It's taking all of those components and giving a score-based output. Now, if you're not familiar with how that works, for example, if we were to go look at EURCAD, as it is the top rated one. We can take a look at pound dollar also. What you'll see is that when we click into this specific sheet, it's loading here the last components of it. What you'll notice is that we have a -6 score and the entire broken down components to it. So this is basically when I take a trade, this thing almost has to be biased towards the direction that I want to go in. So in the case of EURCAD, I'm not going to be buying EURCAD, right? I have to be looking predominantly for sells because these components factored in according to the way we look at them point towards more sell bias. So again, if we looked throughout this report, the COT data favors the CAD. If we take a look at retail sentiment, the crowd is super long biased on EURCAD. If we took a look at seasonality goes against us, which is this crowd here, which is this little plotted section. You can see that in the month of August, taking a look at historical data, EURCAD tends to be positive, right? So then we can continue down the list. We can take a look at the trend reading. So you have a nice downward momentum overall. So this is our new forecast chart, which we just recently finished programming and building. This is basically just a forecasted area of where we think price could go in terms of a momentum basis. And then, of course, GDP growth to the downside. So GDP pointing towards selling euros, right? Buying CAD. So CAD has a higher output in terms of GDP in the most recent reporting. And then if you take a look at unemployment and interest rates, both of those tend to favor the Canadian dollar. Higher interest rates in Canada, more attractive. And then if you're looking at unemployment, you have a lower unemployment rate in Canada, which is of course better. So I'm factoring all these things into an idea before I place a trade, and I'm doing it all through this software. If this software is something that you would like to get your hands on, if you'd like a copy of this, you can use the link down below in the description. Click that link, use the promo code there, and get 40% off the Edge Finder this week. We are doing a short-term sale to allow more people to try out the tool. But again, you get access to all sorts of things. We also have a smart money tracker, which is kind of cool. You can get an idea of what institutional positions are looking like based on the commitment of traders data and the way that we incorporate it into our tool. So you can see, for example, the most strongly heavily bought thing is the US dollar, and the strongly shorted thing is the AUD. So I'm taking all of those things into account, and they factor into the individual sheets when we look at our favorite pairs. So there you go. We'll go back and take a look at EURCAD now. So while we're on the topic of the euro, I do like shorting the EURCAD as well this week. What we'll see is that on the daily chart, we have a nice overall downward trend. This is a trade setup that I've been looking out for myself. Continuing to try and short this thing and see if we can catch a nice bid to the downside. So check this out. If we take a look at the supply zone marked here, what you'll see is that price has been continuously trying to poke up into this level and finding a lot of sellers. So my bet is I think that we could see a rollover effect here, and potentially, even if it's this week, maybe we'll see it, a break of this previous low. And I think that going along with the trend, that's where we would expect price to go. You can see this is what happens very often, right? We enter a phase of consolidation like this, right? And then eventually we're able to break that level. So we'll see if we can start getting a move back down to the previous low. If that can happen, question will then be, can we actually officially break through that level for some continuation plays? So that's kind of how I'm playing EURCAD. I have my trade already on this one. So that is a position that I'm looking out for again this week personally. Now, again, if I'm wrong about that trade, I will stop out should we break back up into the previous highs. But we will just have to see on that one. Let's take a look at pound dollar because we discussed it briefly here. Let's head back over to the Edge Finder just for a second. I want to show you this. So even though the pound dollar has a sell bias, what you'll notice is that from just a technical analysis standpoint, this trade is not quite ready in my view, because what we see right here is that we actually have momentum here pushing to the upside. Now, even though this thing is getting a sell rated rating, right? We know that momentum here is pushing to the upside. And if we switch back over to your pound USD trade or the chart here, what you'll see is that yes, we have a strong overall downward trend, but momentum recently has been to the upside. So what I'd like to see here, we've kind of seen the early start to potentially seeing a downward market here. If we take a look at the 4-hour chart, you can see bam, we had this upward trend, and now we're actually starting to fade underneath. So one thing that I do like here is look at how we closed this week. This is huge. We closed with a candle underneath this level here. Looking left, what we can see is that that was a big level of support that actually got broken to the downside and now retesting that towards the end of last week. So the pound USD actually looks really interesting for some potential shorts there as we retest into that 1.2075 area. We'll see if this can continue, but to me, the pound USD, if we continue to see sort of signs of weakness and momentum starting to shift back to the downside, this thing very well could be headed back down to the previous lows. So for example, in terms of a target zone, generally on this one, I'm thinking that the pound USD, especially if the dollar does follow through with what we initially discussed, right? With the US dollar bouncing off of a daily level, like I think that we could definitely have some potential to see more strength on the US dollar, which could cause things like the GBPUSD to come down. So here's an idea, right? So we have this idea. So we basically have broken underneath. This was huge. Now we're retesting. And if you were to get granular lower time frame, you might even be able to see this set up a little bit better. In fact, let me show you the 1 hour. I bet it looks pretty decent. So taking a look at the 1 hour chart, we are retesting a zone of now resistance, right? Coming into the 38.2/50% retracement zone, which lines up right around here. So to me, this looks like a half decent trade to continue that downward momentum that we saw happen on the Friday report from NFP. I mean, that was a really impressive NFP move. And that's often what we see, you guys, is we see the big NFP move. So this was NFP. And then often what we see is when that happens, you get a little bit of a fade back the other direction, but the momentum of this does oftentimes continue going into Monday, right? Because jobs numbers from a fundamental standpoint is a huge, huge catalyst. That's why NFP can be so important. Sometimes you get weird movements on NFP. What really matters and why people get confused about that, people say, oh, NFP just doesn't go anywhere. NFP goes somewhere if numbers are different than expectations. So on Friday, what we saw was the jobs numbers in the US were really good, like way better than expected, which caused the dollar to spike and things like GBP and Euro to fall, relatively speaking. So big move to the downside there. Continuation move could come in on Monday. I do like GU potentially for shorts. And there you go. Let's go back to the Edge Finder here for a second, see what else we have on the score chart summary. And if there's anything else here that's super interesting. Let's see if another thing I wanted to point out really quickly was the indices. If you trade US 30, SPX500, NAS 100, UK 100, German 30, if you trade any of the big ones, right? JP225. We just added a valuation thing. This is really quite cool. It basically takes into price to earnings and forward price to earnings and gives a slight valuation adjustment. So you can see that actually things like UK 100 are getting a higher valuation level than SPX US 30. But despite that, we're seeing some nice momentum. If we look at the S&P 500 specifically, let's go find that. Close some of these. Take a look at indices, SPX500, for example. The SPX500 looks really healthy. We have strong momentum here to the upside, which is a huge factor into this. And what you'll see is that we get a +3, gives us a buy rating, our nice little animated thing there. And again, a nice bias filtering in. So SPX500. So this one definitely to me looks like a buy, especially on retests, right? So for example, a couple ideas, higher lows coming into this market, lots of strength here. We've seen just an impressive rally overall. And to me, when the stock market starts rallying, there's very few times where it's easy to just try and short that rally, right? Because we have seen for the last year really, a lot of pops get sold into, but this is the first time that we've actually seen a prolonged up move. Like we've seen continued higher lows, we've seen resistance being broken, and if you're naturally watching resistance being broken, watch for 4160 this week. So if we zoom in so you can see this a little better, we're looking at the 4-hour chart. Watch for this level to potentially be broken and act as support. So you have a couple scenarios. Perhaps you're looking for a retest of this area here, 4085, give or take, or a break and retest here at 4160. To me, this is bullish until further notice. This thing has a strong momentum to the upside, and I would be willing to potentially buy pullbacks, as I have been. I've been buying a lot of the indices and individual stocks on my personal accounts. If you'd like to pause the video, you can take a look at the stocks that I personally own. I believe this is up to date. Yeah, these are the stocks that I own, and I've been doing pretty well with them. If you guys know financial education, Jeremy, I watch his channel pretty often. I have TTCF, not a lot. I literally have so little of it, but just to track it. Anyways, if we take a look at go back to the Edge Finder for a second. What else do we have on the list? Go back here. So again, indices looking strong. I would like to see what is going on with gold as well. So if we take a look here, gold is slightly neutral, not quite poking up into the buy zone. If we take a look at the commodity itself, we'll go in, narrow in here. So gold does get a nice momentum reading, trend reading of 2, which is a strong momentum to the upside. So if we take a look at gold, whoops, XAUUSD. If we jump into a gold specific view here for a second, what we can see is that gold too, similar to the US indices, has been finding a nice support level each time it pulls back. And this is a huge thing, is like just the simple momentum reading, right? Just understanding like, okay, higher lows in a market, higher highs in a market. It's just showing that there's demand of this market. So a couple things that are kind of keeping us from getting a positive score on this. What we can see is that GDP growth negative is giving us a -1. Is that right? I think that should be the opposite. Usually GDP growth is actually supposed to be a positive indicator on this. So I might need to double check that. But regardless, what we can see is that this thing is saying, over the next couple weeks, just from a momentum standpoint, we would expect gold to continue its momentum until further notice. I really like the fact that this week on gold, we had several attempts from sellers to come in, like big candles coming in here, but it was met with strong buyers very, very quickly. So this week, if this thing does double back into this zone, to me, this level looks like a stronghold for buyers until proven otherwise. So, stops below, that sort of thing, continuation plays. It's a bit of a swing trade, but And I would say a lot of times newer traders, they love gold, but they don't have a big account. I'd be very careful trading gold, especially on a swing trading basis, because even a 0.01 can really be a lot of money for a small account. So please be very careful out there with that. But I do like gold personally. I like gold at a pullback level like 1755, give or take, for potential upside continuation. Just going with the momentum there until that momentum cracks. So that's where we're at with that. Let's take a look at the yen pairs for a moment. Take a look at USD JPY, which moved big to the upside here this week. Similar to the US dollar, the dollar yen kind of reflected that bullishness. We came down into this daily level and beautifully bounced off of it very, very quickly. Price came down here and shot off the lows. Now, taking that into the lower time frames, since we've been doing all that big momentum, we've seen several instances where price has double backed and given us a couple chances to try and retest buy this thing. So for example, we had this pullback here. So a lot of chances here, in my opinion, to potentially get into something like this this week. Dollar yen on a pullback, that sort of thing. So just a simple setup there. If we take a look at this, this candle right here, that's NFP again. If we were to draw fibs from the swing low here, right, you've got that 38.2 to 50% retracement zone somewhere in here. Looks like to me a nice potential buy side opportunity. So if I was to go here, right, stops below 61.8 in case price does want to just kind of wick down into those areas. But to me, this would be a decent setup for this week that I'd be interested in. Especially, honestly, I wouldn't just be expecting it to go back to the previous high. I would expect it to continue higher with potentially the ultimate retest zone being the previous high. But that is quite a ways away. But again, if you get a move like this, right, it only takes one move like that, like a prolonged one directional move. If that were to happen, right, for it to get that breakout to the upside, we could very quickly be back at the previous highs with dollar yen this week. So that is what I would be interested in seeing and looking out for. So again, if you guys would like access to the Edge Finder, like I said, you can get a copy here for 40% off, get a massive discount using the promo code YTVIP down below in the description. And I hope that you guys who are using it, check out the new features. We just added a whole bunch of stuff, a lot. You can also see like upcoming news for specific charts that you're looking at. So for example, if I go to, let me see, if I go to euro dollar, I can see down here news that's coming up for the euro that could be very impactful to my trade. Of course, it will also filter it by impact and all sorts of things. Also, if you want to take advantage of the price forecasts, you can actually go in here and get like an individual view. So for example, if I want a bigger screen view of the price forecast, here's dollar Swiss, right? If I can select any one off of our list, we can take a look at the S&P 500. You can also track smart money moves basically by seeing what the commitment of traders data tells us. We have so many pairs now. We have all of the major and minor pairs that most traders look at. We have oil and gold. We just made some adjustments to oil to factor in Brent crude. So it adds all sorts of stuff here. Indices, we added the valuation tactic, which will just basically, you can see for those of you guys who are wondering about that, if you trade indices for valuation, excuse me, we compare current PE ratios to forward PE, EPS, earnings per share for the past 5 years and the next 5 years, sales for the past 5 years, as well as float short positions. And that's how we get that little valuation component. So just cool features being added. We have 4 people working on this tool right now, which is absolutely amazing. So we've been working really, really hard. And again, get your copy, take advantage of all of our hard work, and support the project by getting yourself a copy. And we'll continue to make more and more features for that one-time fee. So click that link in the description and get yourself a copy. Thank you guys. Have a great trading week. Trade safe, and we'll see you next time.